At 81 years of age, a realization has recently come to light that leaves me torn between dark amusement and pure heartache. For 21 years, the federal government has routinely issued me monthly payments that fell short of what I was rightfully owed. This was not the result of a simple administrative oversight or a misplaced digit on a government form. Rather, it stemmed from a single decision made on a mundane Wednesday afternoon inside a county bureau, while sitting opposite a bureaucrat whose necktie did not quite match his shirt, who presented me with a solitary figure and completely failed to mention that an alternative option was available right alongside it. I agreed to that initial amount because I had absolutely no idea another path existed. Consequently, for 21 years, month after month, I quietly accepted less than my due simply because no one ever took the time to explain that there was something worth examining. The reason for explaining how this transpired is not to look for pity, nor is it because an apology is expected at this advanced stage of life. This story needs to be shared because right now, sometime this very week, another man is likely sitting in the exact same office chair that I occupied over 2 decades ago. It would mean the world to know that someone might tap that person on the shoulder and advise them to ask just one more question before signing their name to that paperwork. No one was there to nudge me back then, so this is a way of offering that crucial warning to others. My late wife Helen and I shared 36 years of marriage in a modest home situated just outside Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was the sort of place where you knew every single creaking floorboard by heart because your feet had crossed them tens of thousands of times. My livelihood consisted of driving a delivery route for a regional freight outfit for nearly my entire career. That kind of employment keeps a person behind a steering wheel for 10 hours every day, gradually taking a heavy toll on your lower back and knees without you ever consciously noticing the damage as it happens. Helen dedicated almost that same amount of time to teaching second grade at an elementary school located 2 towns away. To supplement our income, she also took on evening seamstress work, mending trousers and replacing broken zippers for a large portion of our local congregation. A running joke between us was that one way or another, our work touched the life of every resident in the county, whether through me delivering their freight or Helen tailoring their Sunday clothes. Everything changed on a Sunday morning when Helen suffered a stroke while preparing for church. While pouring coffee in the kitchen, a sudden noise echoed from the bathroom that remains impossible to adequately describe, even after all this time. The ambulance arrived, and I stayed right by her side during the entire ride to the hospital, holding her hand. 3 days later, in a sterile room filled with the scent of rubbing alcohol and stale coffee, she passed away. I was 59 years old at the time, and she was 61. Anyone who has ever lost a lifelong partner understands the thick fog that rolls in immediately after a funeral. Well-meaning neighbors deliver casseroles, offer a supportive squeeze of the shoulder, and repeat comforting phrases about her being in a better place, but none of it truly registers. The human mind simply isn't equipped to process consolation during that initial, devastating week. During that period of deep grief, my daughter Nancy insisted on driving me to the Social Security office because she knew the administrative tasks could not wait, and she rightly judged that I was in no condition to operate a vehicle. Memory recalls sitting in a rigid, government-issue plastic chair that seemed designed to be uncomfortable from every angle, clutching a manila folder that held our marriage license and Helen's death certificate. Those were the only 2 documents in existence that carried any weight for me that week. Eventually, an employee called my name, and I took a seat across from his desk. He entered some information into his computer terminal, studied the monitor for a brief moment, and quoted a specific dollar amount. The precise phrasing has faded over the years, but the overwhelming sensation remains vivid, which was a desperate urge to conclude the meeting as quickly as possible so I could retreat to the familiar comfort of my own kitchen. After signing exactly where the representative indicated, a handshake concluded the meeting, and I returned home. That single figure dictated my financial reality for the subsequent 21 years. It covered the heating costs during freezing February stretches when the Kentucky wind howled relentlessly. It reliably settled the property taxes when autumn arrived each year. While it was never an abundant sum of money, it proved sufficient when paired with the modest savings accumulated from a lifetime of commercial driving. When a person has spent their entire adulthood managing finances with strict care, having just enough feels remarkably close to prosperity. The accuracy of that figure was never once doubted, and there seemed to be no reason to question it, given that it originated directly from a federal institution on official letterhead bearing a formal government seal. A person does not sit at their dining table second-guessing the authority of the United States government at 59 years old, especially when their spouse has just passed away days after a sudden medical emergency, leaving them with a stack of documents that causes their hands to tremble. As a result, decades simply rolled by. That is the plain truth of the matter. The years advanced quietly while attention remained detached from the bureaucratic gears operating beneath daily life, focusing instead on just getting through each ordinary day. The house remained mine, and for a considerable duration, part-time employment was kept at the local downtown hardware store. The motivation was largely just to have a purpose each morning, alongside an unexpected fondness for the distinct aroma of freshly sawn lumber. Grandchildren gradually grew until they were looking me directly in the eye rather than looking up. The diner operating on Main Street transitioned ownership twice. My own hands steadily aged until they became identical copies of my father's hands, exhibiting the same loose skin across the knuckles and the familiar brown spots marking the back. Every January, the monthly deposit from Social Security adjusted upward by a small margin to account for inflation, just as it does for every retiree across the country. It was never given a second thought, remaining as constant and unquestioned as the daily sunrise. A person does not scrutinize the dimensions of the sun. They simply exist beneath it and go about their routine. Everything changed completely on a specific Tuesday morning, not through an official visit to a government branch or via a notice delivered to my mailbox, but during a casual conversation over coffee at that very same hardware store. 4 or 5 of us retired men still maintain a daily habit of gathering there, using upturned paint pails as makeshift stools because the proprietor never got around to purchasing proper seating. 5 regulars were present that morning, including an old friend named Gene, who used to operate the local feed store before it went out of business. He mentioned in a casual, offhand manner that his son, a bank employee who kept a protective eye on his father's financial affairs, had been reviewing some old records. Gene chuckled lightly, the way someone does when a problem has already been resolved and no longer causes distress, as he shared that his boy discovered he had been receiving the incorrect benefit amount for years. When pressed for clarification, Gene explained that 2 entirely separate benefit streams had actually been available to him the whole time: his own retirement benefit from his years running the feed store and the survivor benefit from his deceased wife. No one at the agency had ever informed him that he had the right to claim one specific benefit first, allowing the alternative amount to defer and accumulate delayed retirement credits until it reached a much larger sum later on. He related this information as casually as someone recalling a forgotten store coupon for a sale that had long since passed. Meanwhile, I sat frozen with my coffee cup suspended midair, feeling a sudden chill settle deep in my chest. Silence defined the remainder of my morning. Upon returning home, I sat down at the kitchen table where Helen and I had shared breakfast for 36 consecutive years and stared blankly at the wall for a long time. To be perfectly candid, the monetary loss was not even the primary thought during that first hour. The focus was entirely on those 21 lost years, reflecting on every single morning spent sitting in that exact spot adjusting the budget and stretching dollars much tighter than necessary, completely unaware that additional funds were sitting just out of reach simply because no one bothered to explain the rules during the most painful week of my life. That evening, a phone call was made to Nancy to relay what Jean had discovered. After a brief, stunned silence on the line, she promised to investigate the matter the following day. When she called back the next afternoon, she began asking a series of targeted questions that would have never crossed my mind independently. She inquired about the relationship between the survivor benefits currently being received and the retirement credits that had been independently earned during those decades spent driving a commercial delivery truck. those old freight routes, which had always been viewed merely as a means to provide daily sustenance, had actually been silently generating an independent retirement entitlement beneath the surface for decades. It was revealed that those working years had indeed established an independent benefit, though it was certainly not an immense fortune. Accuracy is paramount here, as there is no desire to embellish a story or exaggerate the facts to make a point. The difference was not an amount that would completely revolutionize a person's retirement lifestyle, but it represented a substantial sum of money. Those funds would have made a massive difference during those lean, difficult early years of widowhood, carrying far more practical value than they do today at age 81, while living in a fully paid-off home with independent grandchildren who require no financial assistance. If the right question had been posed at age 59, instead of merely nodding and signing wherever the clerk pointed, that money would have compounded quietly over 2 decades into a very meaningful cushion. The primary source of pain was not actually the lost dollar amount itself. The true sting came from a gentle sentence Nancy uttered during our conversation, clearly hating to be the bearer of such news, when she explained that agency employees are fully expected to guide applicants through these exact scenarios when they initially file. The option had been valid and available from the very beginning. No regulations were violated and no laws were broken. The agency simply failed to present the option, leaving an individual with no independent framework to even request it. That explanation lingered in my mind long after the call ended. The realization that no laws were broken and it was simply a matter of omission is what remains difficult to swallow weeks later. It was not a criminal act, nor was it a deliberate attempt to defraud an elderly citizen. It was merely an institutional silence, a single omitted explanation during a conversation that took place during the absolute darkest week of my life, a time when I possessed zero capacity to comprehend what choices even existed. Eventually, the agency was contacted directly, with Nancy sitting right beside me at the kitchen table to provide emotional support, her laptop open and ready to cross-reference data if necessary, while a representative was on the line. That phone call was far from straightforward, as public administration systems rarely prioritize simplicity, and it would be dishonest to claim full understanding of every technical calculation the representative explained regarding the adjustments. However, by the conclusion of the conversation, one reality emerged with absolute clarity. A corrective election is permitted starting immediately. It cannot retroactively amend the prior 21 years, and nothing ever will. That past money is permanently gone, much like water that has already crested a dam. Moving forward, however, starting with the very next cycle, the monthly entitlement check will be noticeably larger than the deposits received over the past 2 decades, all because a question was finally asked that should have been raised by a professional back when I was 59, grieving, and entirely too overwhelmed to identify my own blind spots. Another event occurred just last week that bears mentioning because it left a deep impression. This entire sequence of events was shared with another longtime friend named Ross, who had lost his spouse approximately 12 years ago. He became completely silent upon hearing it, mirroring my exact reaction to Jean at the hardware store. It turned out he had never verified his own filing options either. 2 days later, he contacted the administration, and while his specific numbers and history yielded a slightly different calculation than mine, he discovered that his independent retirement benefit, earned from decades of operating a small automotive repair shop, would now provide a higher monthly payout than the survivor benefits he had been drawing exclusively from his late wife's record all this time. That makes 2 distinct individuals in a single small Kentucky town who uncovered this discrepancy simply because neighbors happened to discuss their personal affairs at the right moment. It forces a person to wonder how many other men are out there right now, relying on an unverified figure simply because no one ever alerted them to the existence of an alternative option worth exploring. My father used to observe that the costable errors in a man's life are always the quiet ones. They do not announce their arrival with a dramatic crash or a sudden warning siren. Instead, they sit silently year after year, slowly eroding your resources a little bit at a time until you eventually take notice and realize how much security has quietly slipped through your fingers while your attention was directed elsewhere. That describes this situation perfectly. There was no sudden alarm, just a collection of digits printed on an official document that received complete trust for 21 consecutive years, while a completely different, superior financial option sat unnoticed right next to it, waiting for someone to finally speak it aloud. There is no bitterness regarding this situation, and stating that clearly feels important. Sleep is not lost to late-night anger directed at the specific clerk who handled the paperwork all those years ago. That individual was likely processing an endless line of grieving spouses that week, focusing entirely on completing his assigned appointments so he could return home to his own household. No anger is directed at the broader system either, as resentment serves no practical purpose for a man at this stage of life. The prevailing sentiment is actually something much quieter and heavier than anger, resembling the distinct sorrow that surfaces when you realize how much of a lifetime is simply dictated by circumstance, while you are too focused on basic survival to pause and formulate the proper inquiries. If there is a single lesson to be extracted from an old man's Tuesday morning conversation over coffee, it is that you possess an absolute right to ask searching questions even when you are exhausted, deeply grieving, or feeling utterly overwhelmed. Even when the official seated across the desk appears to possess an unassailable level of expertise, you are fully entitled to ask if the path presented is the solitary option available, or if there are alternative strategies that require consideration. Anyone currently age 60, 70, or anywhere in between who is currently collecting a public benefit that was established years ago without ever independently auditing the underlying math is being asked gently by someone with absolutely nothing to gain or lose by sharing this truth to initiate a single verifying phone call. This is not intended to cause panic or suggest that an error definitely exists, but rather because 21 years were spent operating under the assumption that an official statement represented the entire truth, when it actually represented only a fraction of it. It is infinitely better to resolve that uncertainty through a brief, proactive phone inquiry this week than to uncover the discrepancy decades down the road over a cup of coffee that has gone cold while you were looking away. Anyone who recognizes this scenario, whether in their own life, in the circumstances of their father, or in the situation of a widowed neighbor down the street who has never questioned their monthly statement, should pass this information along immediately. Sharing a comment about similar experiences within your own family is highly encouraged, as there is a very strong suspicion that this administrative silence has affected countless households nationwide. For those interested in continuing to hear perspectives from an elder who is apparently still uncovering vital life lessons at 81 years of age, please stay close, as it appears there are still a few valuable insights left to share.